The amount of disinformation circulating in our world has exploded. From mainstream to social media, the more we know, the more we realize we're living in the age of lies. Lies about the most serious issues in our lives.
White nationalism.
People used to complain about the bias, promotion of hate and anger in the corporate media.
You should be angry at what has happened here.
Now we have the worst culprit, the social media.
Facebook continues to be under fire for failing
with all types of platforms, but no gatekeepers, no editors, no standards, and nothing standing in the way.
That was a big mistake, and I'm sorry.
Executives admitted their limitations, but promised they will do a better
It discourages slow and thoughtful reflection or questioning. And the temptation to share is as great as it is dangerous.
Gee, you wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals.
Every lie about the perceived others sows doubt that leads to fear, hate, anger, and ultimately violence.
I think Islam hates us.
Once you've heard something false, even if it's corrected, the false story sticks. For example, just one report that claimed a vaccine caused autism was withdrawn as fraudulent. Its author was discredited.
Disgraced and discredited. The doctor.
He lost his medical license. No researcher has found any evidence of a link to autism. Yet surveys show that 53% of the public still believes there is good evidence to support a connection.
It's remarkable how much damage one man can do.
Research has shown that even after people accept evidence of lies, false information still lingers in their minds. Now compare the impact of this one report about a vaccine causing autism with the impact of hundreds of books and documentaries and reports exclusively produced with the purpose of demonizing a people and their faith. To figure out truth in the age of lies, let's begin with the most dangerous lie of our age.
What's the biggest lie about Islam?
That Muslims hate the non-Muslims.
So that's one of the biggest misunderstandings, that Muslims hate the non-Muslims. Most of the time what happens is that people don't realize that they are actually suffering from this sickness of hate. One of the research studies is giving some examples like that. So do you remember that?
The study of the people that said that they didn't have hate in their hearts for people.
Mm-hmm.
Studies conducted by Aaron Halperin asked people to think of one event in their lives in which they felt hatred for others. All 40 interviewees immediately said that they had never experienced hate for others.
But when they were asked if they wanted to annihilate the people, like other people, they had said yes.
Yeah, so that proved that they were actually suffering from hate, but they thought they were not experiencing the feeling of hatred.
This also illustrates the social inappropriateness of hate and the unwillingness to acknowledge feeling such a destructive emotion.
So that's why we are beginning here with just to understand what is hate from the psychological perspective as well as from the philosophical perspective. Based on your homework, what is hate? How would we define hate?
Hate develops step by step, like love. Ultimately, it removes human values, morals, religious norms that guide our behavior.
So so we have those religious norms and moral values and everything, right, to guide and to restrict our behavior, right? But when we have hatred, when we have the feeling of hatred for someone, so the first thing is that we ignore all those norms.
In the process of hate, the subject of our hatred loses all moral or human consideration. When hatred intensifies, a certain fanatical obligation to get rid of the person or group that is the object of the hatred can easily arise.
What's the first objective of hate? So I could be angry at someone. What's the difference between hate and anger?
Anger, it lasts for just a short amount of time. When you're angry at someone. Hate, it lasts for forever, or a very long time, and it's just hating everything about it.
And it wants to annihilate and destroy and completely remove. So we have those who hate, and then we have the object of hate, right? Or this is like if it's a group of people who hate other people, then this is called which group?
In group.
This is in group, and that one is out group, right? So the in group would like to completely eliminate the out group.
Hate is thus a powerful negative emotional phenomenon, a stable perception of a person or group, and thus the incapability to change the extremely negative characteristics attributed to the target of hate. Its judgments are targeted at the hate target itself, rather than at specific actions carried out by that target.
So there's the difference between other negative feelings like anger, because anger would like, so if I'm angry at you, I would like to correct you, and if you correct your behavior or whatever action that that's bothering me, then I'll be okay with you. But if I hate you, then I'll be looking for ways to completely remove you out of my sight. And then ultimately, because of that, what happens?
It turns into violence.
Yeah, because then you will
want to annihilate.
Exactly. And for that you get into violence or cause a serious harm, right? So hatred is an emotional attitude, and it's a kind of a normative judgment to devalue others, to judge them and devalue them. The interesting thing is that those who hate others are not because of their actions, but because of
their hate.
But because of who they are, right? So it's not because of what they did or what they're doing or what they've done, but because who they are, right? So even if they do something good, they'll try to find faults with that. That's why hatred is the most damaging feeling or sickness that one can have. All right, so then when we look into two aspects of the hatred, that why we develop hate, right? So one could be cognitive, that's related to our mental actions, the process of acquiring knowledge through experience, right?
Our negative perceptions about others trigger hatred, which is further intensified by various factors such as ideological or political leaders who devalue the outgroup, ultimately leading to discrimination and violence.
And the other one could be emotional. So emotions could be like anger, fear, and hostility. And then cognition. What is cognition? So cognition is anything related to your thought process, right? We generalize things about the people that we hate. All of them are bad, right? All of them are thinking this way. All of them are doing this way. We have some preconceptions about them. We judge their actions based on our preconceptions, and that's what we call cognitive factors. But actually, the hatred is more about the subject or the in-group, right, rather than about the out-group, because we develop certain thoughts, certain negative perceptions, certain negative attitudes.
We have distorted thoughts. Our exaggerations, misinterpretations, and emotional reactions are directly proportional to the distortion of our thoughts. All that intensifies
the feelings of hatred for the out-group or for the object or for the people that we hate. Good? All right, so that was the psychological perspective, but then there is a philosophical perspective about hatred, right? That how we develop hate and then how we deal with it. So can you explain this to me? That how we develop our sense of helplessness, and then how do we actually respond to that, and how that makes us better or bitter in our lives.
Okay, so everyone in their life goes through their rights being violated, troubles, oppression, calamities, persecution. Everyone goes through that, and this makes the person feel like they don't deserve the right to exist. Mm-hmm. It makes them feel like I don't feel like I shouldn't exist.
I don't deserve to exist.
I don't deserve to exist.
Actually, the person experiences a blow in his ability to feel his right to existence in the world and the right to his own particular needs and sense of security and integrity.
This awakens the feeling of helplessness, feeling helpless to whatever situation you're in. Within this helplessness is an ontological posture.
So that helplessness is actually an integral part of our being, right?
That means our helplessness in this world is an integral part and characteristic of our ontology.
Every one of us, every single one of us feels that helplessness at different times in our lives, right? But then it depends on how we respond to that helplessness, right? So there is no one in this world who would not suffer any of these types of calamities and who would not come to feeling this sense of helplessness. But it then depends how we respond to that helplessness. And that's what shapes our behavior, and that's what shapes our actions. So Omar, can you tell me what types of responses do we have to that helplessness, and how that determines our behavior and attitude?
So you can either accept it or you can reject it. If you confront the helplessness and then you accept that it is Allah who is the only one that can help you, so then you become better. But if you try to eliminate the feeling of helplessness and try to take control and dominate, then you will become bitter.
And then when you are bitter, it means that it will affect your behavior, and then all your responses and all your actions would be bitter as well, right? So that's where the element of hatred comes in, right? So if you accept your helplessness, then you know your limits. You don't go beyond you cannot go beyond your limits anyway. So you know your limits, and then you stay within those limits, and then you are actually grateful for what you have instead of developing envy and hatred for others. And then you trust in your creator and you become better. So that's the philosophical perspective. And then if you look into the religious perspective, right? The religious perspective tells us that true belief actually leads to peace and contentment of mind, and it protects you from developing hatred and leading to some kind of extreme and violence against others, right? So this is the religious perspective in a nutshell, right? Which is that true belief prevents us from developing hatred and violence. So just quickly tell me that what's the rationale behind that statement that true belief protects you from hatred? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so in every history book, when you open a history book, it'll always talk about wars. This country fought this country, this tribe fought this tribe, or it'll always be about money, economy,
conflict of interests. Okay.
In the Quran, it'll talk about the process of struggle between the prophets and the community.
Mm-hmm. And that struggle is always to be on the straight path, right?
Oh yeah, the struggle to get on the straight path and to teach the community that they're with to be on the straight path.
And to follow the
objective moral standards.
Objective moral standards. Not to follow subjective moral standards, but objective moral standards, right? All right. So that's what the struggle is all about, right? To be on the straight path, not to have a conflict of interest. It's not about interest. So that's how Quran views the history, and then the way Quran describes the difference between belief and unbelief, and how unbelief leads to hatred. Just give us some quick rationale.
The disbelievers, they're in non-acceptance and they're in doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doubting the truth and denial and rejection, which then leads to discontent, dissatisfaction, fear, lack of trust, and uncertainty, which then leads to fear.
But why does unbelief lead to dissatisfaction, discontentment, fear, etc.? Why does unbelief lead to those things?
Because they're in ignorance. They have the disease in the heart, which can't be cured without Islam.
Give me some other reason.
Because they're in non-acceptance, they're in denial, they're in doubt.
There's a link to this one, right? So if you're a non-believer, you're not accepting what you're going through. You're
rejecting. So
you're rejecting what?
The truth.
You're rejecting your helplessness. You want to fight and to gain whatever you want to gain, right? To achieve. And on the other hand, you reject that everything is from your creator, right? You think that you're in control, right? And then what?
So you are in rejection, you're in doubt, and then that leads to discontentment.
Because you cannot achieve everything that you want to achieve, right?
Because you can't turn to Allah to make for Him to comfort you. And
because
because you don't believe Him.
You don't believe in the first place, right? And then what happens? So since you cannot achieve what you want to achieve, because we are limited in our power, right? Then what happens is that we develop
hatred
against
the believers,
the out group,
the out group, or those who have those possessions, right, that you don't have, and you want to be rich like them, or you want to be successful like them. You want to have all those things that they have, right? As an individual, as well as a group. So if you are an in-group, a group of people looking down upon other people or not liking others for whatever reason, right? So you'd like to eliminate them, so that hatred would lead to aggression and violence. And then there's the unbelief, right, or the disbelief, and then there's belief. Then
so if you're a believer, that leads, what you're doing is the truth, so it leads to peace, contentment, and you have a sense of coexistence
with others, right?
With others.
So that's tolerance and compassion for others, right?
But if you're in nominal belief, that leads to ignorance, disease in the heart, and not following the straight path. So unresolved traumatic experiences. So you were rejecting the traumatical experiences that you had, the helplessness that you felt. You're just rejecting it. So you will not be content with yourself.
Yeah, and then so you're not contented with yourself, and then that leads to the same kind of
hatred, aggression.
So if you're a non-believer, or if you're a nominal believer, and you are a nominal believer because of your ignorance, right? Because of your lack of true strong faith, right? And that leads to what's called in the Quran a disease of the heart, right? And then ultimately all those things. So exactly you reach the same point where the non-believers are reaching, and then that phase of your life is
counted as disbelief.
So that's recorded in your book of deeds as a state of unbelief, right? So that's a big loss. And Omar, you must remember this from last time. This is just a quick last thing before we move to. All right. So again, we on this side we are looking into the psychological perspective, that there are some type of people, they have sickness, what is called severe narcissistic psychopathology. It's some kind of envy. Those people who have this disease, they feel anger, right? They can see other people succeed in their lives, and they're envious about their possessions and their success and their whatever they have in life. So when they see other people successful in their lives, it gives them pain, right? And that pain is known as narcissistic psychopathology. And then, so they feel that pain, and with that pain comes that feeling of helplessness, right? And powerlessness and emptiness. And the Quran, it describes this as, because of that unbelief, ma'ishatan danka,
a constricted life.
A constricted life, right? And the Quran, it describes this as,
وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً دَنْكًا.
So what does that mean?
Whoever turns away from my remembrance, then they will have a
constricted life. Yeah. So the Quran says that if they don't believe and they turn away from His remembrance, you're not going to remember your Creator. If you don't remember your Creator, you'll develop this disease, which is called narcissistic psychopathology, and the symptoms are exactly what the Quran describes. So the Quran says that they'll be feeling constriction in their life, right? They'll have a constricted life. This is exactly how psychology describes it, that they have a feeling of emptiness, powerlessness, and resentment and restriction in their life, and that leads to anger, aggression, and hate. That's the most important piece, right? That leads to hate, and then that desire to destroy others, right? And then that leads to violence. So Omar, quickly just go through that. So if you are an unbeliever, then what happens? That unbelief renders
your life meaningless. You don't have a point or anything to work to in your life.
Yeah.
Negates all attributes manifest in all creation. Causes hostility.
And then
makes everything to be an enemy of everything else.
So, and that's because of what? Remember the survival of the fittest. In the survival of the fittest, you're trying to survive. You try to be the fittest, right? So you are against everything else. So you are against you're against the creator. You don't believe in the creator, and you don't care about the creation because it's all about you, not about anything else or everything else working in harmony. And then you become greedy, you become hostile, you become full of hate, and then again the same feeling of emptiness. But all of these together leads again to the feelings that one feels when he's suffering from narcissistic psychopathology. And that's why ultimately it proves that there is a link between belief and hatred, right? So if you are an unbeliever, if you don't believe in the creator, that unbelief leads to a psychodynamic of unbelief, which has deep bonds and parallel with the dynamic of hatred, right? So that the psychodynamic of unbelief, right, has deep bonds with the dynamic of hatred. And then we'll build on this, that there's a strong link between belief and hatred, right? So the problem is that in most cases, when individuals develop that feeling of hatred, right, it's just not limited to that individual. They form a group, they look for people, they thrive, that hatred thrives on others having exactly the same feeling, right? And then you become an in-group, and then you hate another group, and then that gradually translates into those people getting into the position of power, right? And when they get into the position of power, then what happens?
They make laws.
They make policies, they make laws, right?
They go against the out-group.
Then all of them go against the out-group, right? The people that they hate. So even those, like for instance, the three of us, we hate a particular group, right? But there are other people like us, but they don't hate the other group. But then some of us get into power, and then we develop those types of policies or enact some kinds of laws which are directly or indirectly affecting that out-group, right? Then those who are like us, but they don't have any hate for the out-group, but they are working for the government, they are working for those institutions, they are working for those organizations in society. So they are now compelled, because of these laws and these policies and these frameworks, to hate other groups indirectly, despite not wanting to, right? They become tools. The quick example is that when Nazi government wanted to hurt Jews, to eliminate Jews, so even a majority of the Germans who were not even Nazis themselves, but if you're working for the government, right, then you will follow the policies, you will follow the laws, you will follow the norms, you will follow the standards and the framework, right? So despite not having hatred in your heart, you become a tool to execute those laws, right? To enforce those laws, and then commit crimes against humanity like that. So that's the downside of mainstreaming hatred, right? So when hate becomes mainstream, this is how people suffer. And in history, all the wars, all the genocides, right? All those things are the core element or the core cause of those things was what? Hatred. So this is just the first part of this series. We'll come back to this to discuss what you see around this as the protective factors from hate, right? From developing hatred. And then we'll discuss those protective factors, which are the core components of Islamic belief, to prove that if you are a true believer, if you're a true Muslim, for instance, in this case, right, you cannot even develop those types of negative feelings towards other people. It goes against your faith, it goes against your belief, it goes against your objective moral standards, right?